Texas and Oklahoma, the very latest. Like I said, it feels like it's going to be a breaking news kind of week. I expect this process, and that process being these two moving to the SEC, or at least making it abundantly clear they're going to, I expect all that to start playing out this week. This is not one of those stories, if you've been a casual observer, that you're going to wait 3 months, 6 months, 2 years on. It's not an NCAA investigation, in other words. There's a lot going on here. But imagine a world, and I'm about to give you a quote in just a second, but imagine a world where we didn't have SEC Media Days last week. I thought about this a lot this week. A lot of you have DM'd me about this too. What if we would not have gotten the Houston Chronicle story? Just to start it off here. Can you imagine a world where you go to work tomorrow or Tuesday, whenever this stuff really starts to snowball, and all of a sudden you're at lunch and you're driving back to the office and you check your phone in the parking lot before you go in, and with no warning, Oklahoma and Texas are leaving the Big 12. They have informed them they intend on joining the SEC. SEC member institutions are about to vote on this tomorrow. What would that have done? A week before camp opens, what would that have done? It's still going to be huge, but at least we have a little heads up it's coming. So we know what we know. There are some things that have happened in the past hour or so, I would say. So in Fort Lauderdale, let's throw this graphic up. This is Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12, after meeting with officials from Texas and OU just a little while ago. Okay, this is happening in the last few hours. Quote from Bob Bowlesby: "The meeting was cordial, and the executive committee of the Big 12 expressed a willingness to discuss proposals that would strengthen the conference and be mutually beneficial to Oklahoma and Texas, as well as the other member institutions of the conference." Bowlesby adds, "I expect that we will continue our conversations in the days ahead, and we look forward to discussing thoughts, ideas, and concepts that may be shared and have shared interest and impact." So essentially, this entire statement brought to you by the late 80s or early 80s hit, "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey. Because that's the message. Don't stop believing. Hey, we're still in this. Still got a fighting chance. Hold the rope. Bob Bowlesby has told his conference to hold the rope. How's all this going to happen? Because I personally, even though I'd love to see it happen, I don't think these two are staying in the Big 12. So how's this going to happen? A lot of you have asked me that. A lot of you are very curious. Well, the way we don't have a lot of experience in this, granted, but the way it probably happens is at some point, it seems inevitable, Texas and OU will inform the Big 12 of their intention to leave. They'll then start that process. Shortly thereafter, it appears you'll have a vote for the member institutions in the SEC. A lot of you have held on faintly to the hope that maybe there'll be enough no votes in order to just derail this concept from the get-go. Spoiler alert, I've seen how that part ends. There won't be. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if you have a 14-0 vote, or maybe a 13-0 with Texas A&M abstaining. That'd be a classy move, or something else with an Z on the end. I would just wait and see how all that plays out, okay? I think it's going to play out sooner rather than later. And thirdly, we just wait to see how many details are made public. So, what could derail this? Short of the no votes in the SEC, which aren't going to happen, what could derail this? Because I am one that wouldn't mind seeing it derailed. I have made my statement on this, and I will reiterate it in just a couple of minutes. And as usual on the show, when I say something, I then have to circle back and tell you what I didn't say, because that's what the comment section's been filled with. How does this get derailed? Well, there are some people who believe political pressure in the state of Texas and or the state of Oklahoma could derail this. Based on, I think, the best reporting that's been out there, and then based on anyone I've talked to about this, specifically in the state of Texas, no one close to the situation out there believes that any of that is viable, only because the folks who are pulling the wheel here, holding the wheel and driving the bus, have had the proper political operatives, figures, etc., read in on this the entire time. So there is no one that holds the keys to this whole situation surprised at the last minute, swerve, etc. So I don't think that's going to happen. How could you derail this? If you're holding out hope, there's one interesting caveat here. If you want to make sure these two don't join the SEC, you obviously either have to have them change their mind and stay in the Big 12, or what if the Big 10 or the ACC were to step up? And you ask, well, Josh, how would you do that? What edge are they going to have over the SEC? The SEC has got more attraction. This is true. That just means you have to have a different edge. You have to have a different angle. And if I'm the Big 10, and if I'm Kevin Warren, clearly I'm not, but if I am, I'm looking and I'm saying, I've got to do something. It is so imperative that the Big 10 acts right now. It is so imperative that the ACC acts right now. But what edge could you have? Well, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking either you offer them equal to what the SEC is offering, which you cannot do. I mean, it is so huge for Texas for a recruiting pipeline alone to get in the SEC, outside of several other factors. But there's this one little caveat that keeps on hanging on the side of every argument that's made for this and every proposal that's made for Texas and Oklahoma to enter the SEC. Every proposal for the Horns and the Sooners to come in the SEC keeps reminding you that it is going to cost them a lot of money if they want to get out of that Big 12 deal early. It's going to cost them in the neighborhood of $150 million. And even in a cash-rich environment, the likes of which these two hang out in, yes, that's a lot of money. Well, I want to ask you this. If you're running things in the Big Ten, for example, and you're looking to think outside the box at the 11th hour in order to circumvent a hostile takeover of college football, which this is nothing less than by the SEC, I wonder if it would not greatly behoove you in the long run, commonsensically and financially, to just bite the bullet and make that the sweetener in your offer to try and derail this. If you're Kevin Warren and the member institutions in the Big Ten, what would you rather do? Would you rather offer to pay that $150 for him in exchange for getting him to the Big Ten next year? Or would you rather keep the cash in your pocket, watch the SEC print it with 8/10 of the major programs in America at their disposal inside their boundaries over the next however many years and end up losing on the back end? Like, how would that play out for you? So I would really, if you're trying to think outside the box, suggest something along those lines. Because I don't know where the SEC stands on that. And I don't know where, in terms of litigation, that's going to go. But right now, that's the thing holding this up from happening next year, is it costs a lot of money. When you're kind of hammered into those TV deals, it costs a lot of money to get out of them. Those grant of rights deals, which most people have learned a majority that they know about this past week when it comes to grant of rights deals. But the feedback for all this has been mildly surprising to me this week. I thought when the news broke, most people in the SEC were going to be on board with it. Whether I was or not, I thought most SEC fans were going to be on board with it. And I did, of course, unscientific polls on my own social channels, but I've listened and I've got a pretty good feel of the pulse down in the SEC. I don't think a majority of the fans are on board with it. And so it's been met with a lot more resistance for the public at large than I thought most people expected. Now, that's not what's going to make the decision at the end of the day, but I think that's still a mild surprise. There is a large percentage of the SEC that's against it because they don't really see any added benefit. And I think that even if you're SEC or you are team logo first, you still do in some shape, form, or fashion care about the sport. And if you look at what this does to the future of the sport, you may not like what it means for college football. But also, there's been a lot of these two things in my inbox, my DMs. It's been, well, why would you be scared of Texas and OU to come to the SEC? I don't think fear is what's motivating any of the pushback. Not to be disrespectful, let me just assure you, it's not fear. It's no one shaking in their boots in Tuscaloosa, Alabama at the thought of the Texas Longhorns or Oklahoma Sooners entering the conference. I think there are other emotions. I don't think fear is one of them. And then the second, and this is so based in ignorance across the landscape of society, not just college football, that I won't pay it much mind, people suggesting that change is good. It can be. It can also be terrible. I could start this show at 2 o'clock in the morning next week. We changed the start time. Is that good? I don't think it is. But if you judge by the comment section of some of these videos, change is good, baby. No, change is not always good. If you are a pro wrestling fan, we try to mix in at least one pro wrestling metaphor per week on the show. Anybody who knows about the history of pro wrestling and the former territory days, if you're of a certain age, you remember Mid-South, you remember Crockett, you remember Continental, you remember all these different territories. And once upon a time, the name Vince McMahon in pro wrestling just meant the guy up in the Northeast. But then slowly but surely, everything got consolidated and it got bought up and it got eaten up. And then if you wanted to watch pro wrestling, eventually by the time I come along in the 90s, you got a couple options. And then eventually, bigger shark eats big shark. And then you got one option. And you better love World Wrestling Entertainment or else you're out. Well, I was out because I don't like the product. And so it really, really makes you look back and say, I wonder what those days would have been like when you had all kind of different territories. I just wonder in the future of college football, if we're 20 years down the road and the dust has settled, if you're sitting there telling a 15-year-old kid, once upon a time, we had something called the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the SEC. It was still the predominant conference, but the Big Ten was huge, the ACC was huge, and now we have, I don't know, fill in the blank, whatever we have 20 years from now. I've told you my big concern on this is the letter C, or the letters SEC just become CFB, which I don't think is really in the best interest of anyone outside of maybe the Southeastern Conference and maybe not even the Southeastern Conference. Last little thing I wanted to mention on the Texas front before I move on here. As I said, there are several angles we want to hit tonight. Last little thing that I was thinking about. I'm very curious if the University of Texas understands what this life is like in the SEC. Not Oklahoma. Leave Oklahoma to the side for a second. I think they are perfectly conditioned to live this life. But I really wonder if Texas is ready to live that SEC lifestyle. You may think you are. Everyone thinks something, but until they experience it, they don't really know. And what I mean by that is it was almost preordained that when Texas walked around Big 12 circles, you had to hit one knee and you had to bow. And you had to tilt that head down a little bit. Why? Because Texas just walked in the room. And I want to let folks in Austin know, when you walk in the SEC, they say, welcome. Think there's a seat open over there by South Carolina. Welcome. I mean, that's what they tell you. And then you say, no, well, we're Texas, so we're not going to go sit next to South Carolina. Well, yeah, you are, because everyone here splits the rev evenly. You don't get to load your own network up in your wagon and drag it to the conference with you. You don't get to bring any of that. Everyone's kind of treated equal. Now, you will not be equal to South Carolina because that logo still carries a ton of weight. But what I'm saying is, I was reading Seth Emerson's work over on The Athletic the other day, and he was making the point, listen, even Nick Saban hasn't totally gotten his way. It feels like it. It's a myth that he kind of runs the conference. No, he doesn't. There are several proposals that he has supported and been turned away on. And in Texas, they're not used to that. We Are Texas means something in the Big 12. It means everything in the Big 12. That's what's rubbed a lot of folks in the Big 12 the wrong way. And I'm just telling you that SEC lifestyle is a little different. You walk in the SEC and you say, hello, we are Texas. And a dude at a service station looks back and says, well, hey, I'm Steve. We're going to pump your gas just like we do everywhere else. Again, you can go sit next to Vanderbilt, and you're going to get the same revenue share they do, and I hope you have fun here. And it's like, no, we're Texas. Yeah, again, I'm Joey. Like, welcome to the party. That's what life is like in the SEC. So I haven't really taken a lot of part in all these conversations about how Texas is going to do on the field in the SEC. Because it's, like I said the other day, it's 1 or 2 year thinking instead of 10 or 20 year thinking. I think competitively, Texas fits in very well. Oklahoma fits in very well. Culturally, just interesting to watch, was all I'm saying.